going to be digging into a bit of information about government contracting, specifically how that interfaces with advanced industry such as additive manufacturing. We'll start here with Gene, and then we'll move to Elizabeth, and then I'll say a little bit about Elementum and how we've interacted with the U.S. government, and we'll kind of go from there. So I'm going to start in here. So we're going to begin with Gene. So Gene, we met about maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, it seems. And we first started interacting by you were helping us get to know a little bit more about how things work within the U.S. Government contracting world. You've held positions at Veridian Space Imaging here in Colorado, and most recently you were the president of CAE, doing a lot of government contracting with contracts in the billions of dollars directly with the U.S. government. You were a Marine officer, which I think is also a piece that lent itself to your interactions with the U.S. government and then later government contracting as well. And then more recently, you joined as board member of Elementum 3D as well. I want to make sure that I outline that because we found the advice that you had provided valuable enough that we needed to have more. So I really appreciate you joining us this morning and really excited to hear a little bit more about what you have to say and to dig in. So with that, I will hand things on to you.
All right, and we're going to test the system and pass control. Thank you, Jacob. I'm happy to be here with everyone. I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about my experiences and what I've seen as technology companies both enter and exploit the defense market. Some of the advantages, disadvantages, and some of the success criteria that I've seen to make companies successful. Just for a moment, I want to point out the quote that I have down at the bottom. This quote is quite famous, been attributed to more than just General Bradley, but when you think about what really drives defense acquisition, their priorities, and most importantly, really becomes the imperative to act, to put money on contracts. Much of it is driven by the ability to man, train, and equip the force. And in today's world, as we look mostly to the Pacific and the challenges of equipping a force that may be thousands of miles away and across an ocean from the continental United States, the ability to provide material and material support in the way of logistics is really at the center of most every conversation. And ultimately, advanced and additive manufacturing in particular is going to play a major role going forward to make that a reality. So I wanted to start by talking a little bit about the defense budget. Most of this is in the headlines, but there's no doubt that one of the major campaign promises made by the current administration was to drive to a $1 trillion defense budget over the next few years. We're going to get pretty close next year with a base budget that is in the that's between $800 and $900 billion. But there's also been House Resolution 1 is a reconciliation bill that will add $150 billion to that total all over the next 2 years. Part of that will be dedicated to Golden Dome, but in many cases, what is in the reconciliation bill is what folks are calling a down payment. And there's other examples of this, but there's no doubt that many of the end items that will drive the requirements for advanced and additive manufacturing, a lot of these investments are going to be in the recapitalization and modernization of major end items in the force. When you look down at the bottom left corner of the slide, you'll see just some of the things I picked out of the reconciliation package alone, and you can see the totals are tremendous. Just the first one, shipbuilding, additive manufacturing, $450 million. By the way, that's separate from what the Navy is budgeting for undersea warfare for submarines. each of these can be the discussion of a full day seminar, but needless to say, there's no company in this market today that's going to be limited by the size of this market. It's going to be about speed, getting to market first, and forming relationships with defense customers that will drive them to invest in your technologies and your company. Now, having said that, the defense market has been around a while. It's a mature market. It's efficient from the perspective that there is an established set of procedures and processes that you have to live within, and it's complex. The thousands of pages that comprise the defense budget, it takes more than a little bit of detective work to figure out where the money is, where it's going to go, and who in the government, and that's usually not a person, but an organization or a group of people, who's going to be the decision maker. So it is a bit complex. All right. Now, most folks know that within the Department of Defense, there's multiple entities. Of course, there are the departments like the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. There are agencies such as DARPA, which some of you have interacted with. And in general, when you look in the defense budget, you will see budgets being justified at the department level, Army, Navy, and Air Force, and you'll also see it for defense-wide programs. The point of this is who actually buys things. And in many cases, a lot of the money flows through the services, through the departments, through the services, because they're really responsible for buying the material, the end items, and putting all the infrastructure to operate and maintain those. So in many cases, the services, the Army, Navy, the Marine Corps, Space Force, and the National Guard all have independent acquisition authority. It is unique that in the combatant commands, the geographic commands, one in particular does have acquisition authority, and that's Special Operations Command. In addition to that, many defense agencies, and I mentioned DARPA, also have the ability to buy, and in many cases, the research and development budgets are driven not just through the services, but through the agencies. So you can imagine multiple buyers or points of sale, and the budget comprises dollars to procure end items, to operate and maintain, and also to do research and development. So again, it takes a lot of effort to spend $1 trillion, and it takes some detective work to find out exactly where that money is. Only to test everyone's eyesight, I put this chart in there to show just one small segment, or one segment, not small, of the defense budget is the monies they spend on research and development. If you look inside the defense budget, you'll see a distinct set of justification books, as they're called, J books, dedicated to the RD&T, research, development, test, and experimentation. This is the money that is spent before a decision is made to buy an end item. And you'll see that in this year, there's over $140 billion being spent. Headline agencies like DARPA have a large chunk of that money, but there are also not just defense laboratories, R&D money being spent in the services, there's money being spent in academia, and there is R&D money in almost every active program so they can continue to improve their engineering. Generally, R&D is divided into basic and applied engineering. So depending on the type of product or service you would offer, you would orient on that. But again, just this one component of the market, especially for an early stage company or for an emerging technology, this money is certainly available. And we're going to talk about how to get to R&D money in a minute, but just the R&D budget alone is larger than most markets out there. So a lot of money being spent in R&D. Now, if we shift to additive manufacturing, there's no doubt that there's a lot of attention being spent. I made note of the fact that if you really want to see if the Department of Defense is interested, see how much bureaucracy they're building around a certain area, and that bureaucracy is here today in additive manufacturing. There are committees, there are governance, there are initiating directives, and more importantly, they are now spending billions of dollars in additive manufacturing. You see it everywhere. You certainly see contracts being made with companies for printers, for material, and for the services that actually allow folks to print either end items, parts, or material, such as the core for solid rocket motors that additive manufacturing contribute to. A lot of end items, literally hundreds of thousands of end items, and I believe that when we look back on this 10 years from now, the baseline for manufacturing defense is going to be additive manufacturing. I also believe what's going to drive this market is the sustainment of end items in the field and moving the ability to do additive manufacturing to the point of need, which obviously then takes pressure off the supply chain to move parts and upgrades forward to forward areas. And as you know, our Department of Defense plays the away game. So the ability to move parts across the Pacific or into Europe or into the Middle East is a major logistics challenge. I made note that a Black Hawk helicopter has over 200,000 parts in the supply chain. So you could imagine the challenge of supporting a single squadron, never mind a wing full of helicopters if they were to be deployed. So additive manufacturing is going to help solve that problem. The one thing I will say that inside the Pentagon and inside programs, the one thing that concerns everybody, which may not be obvious, is the cybersecurity issues related to the integrity of the data files that will need to be moved, and the fact that we will be dependent on communication. So it's an adjacent market to what we're doing in manufacturing, but it's one of those things that, quite honestly, is slowing down the adoption because they want to see how all the parts are going to fit together. So it's an interesting side note that cyber, and if you're in with a customer, don't be surprised if they want to talk about how you secure your information internally, and if you need to move it to a customer, how it'll be secured. Alrighty. There you go. All right. Next slide is a little bit, and now the chart here, the graph, is what the customers think. You know, why are you interested in additive manufacturing? And certainly when you look at the ability to build complex structures and minimize the number of parts, is a very attractive feature. I saw an example that Jacob provided. I believe it was a fuel pump for a helicopter that was made using normal manufacturing methods, had 23 individual parts. The whole part could be printed as a single part, and it could accommodate the complex curves required for the ducting, et cetera. That is a major benefit because you're simply, first of all, it has no moving parts. There's no joints, there's no seals, but the fact that only one part has to be managed in the supply chain is a tremendous benefit. That acknowledgement comes down at the bottom. You see reducing logistics burden by producing spare parts in theater. Again, I believe if we were to look back on this 10 years from now, that will start to dominate when people actually see the benefit of being able to get the part they need at the point of need, get it more quickly, you know, and the benefit that will have to their operations. I think they will start to become more aware of the additional benefits of additive manufacturing. Defense today is about a $7 billion market worldwide. A little more than half is in the US. Estimates go as high as $30 billion over the decade. And the estimate is that the US market, or the North American market, will actually increase more rapidly, with the US being an early adopter. And early is relative here because it's a well-established and stable technology. It's really about making defense primes and defense customers really understand the benefits of additive manufacturing. So education, an educated customer is going to be your friend. But again, this market, when you look at that growth rate, tripling, let's say over the next 10 years is pretty substantial growth. Now, I wanted to talk just a minute about defense contracting, and you have to start with the federal budgeting process. You know that in a sense, this is what the government does. This is what Congress does. We have about a $7.5 trillion federal budget with over a trillion dollars being spent on national defense, the largest discretionary part of the budget. I'll go to the bottom right-hand corner that if Congress is not able to complete the mission and they don't get the budget signed prior to the start of their fiscal year, like in 2025, the government continues to operate on what's called a continuing resolution. There's some rules around that. It allows the government or a program office to spend up to 90% of what they've spent in the previous year. And then if they have to go above that, they have to actually issue a needs statement, and that's done by exception, but not by the rule. But what a continuing resolution really does, as a government program manager, I found that it provided uncertainty as to not only what I was doing this year, but what I was doing next year. And in general, for industry, continuing resolutions are not a good thing. Because it does cause program managers to hesitate, to wait to see what's going on next, and it is quite disruptive. The government's working hard to get at least the defense bill signed. It looks like in 2025, we're almost at the end of the fiscal year. That ends in September. It looks like we're going to go through this entire year under a continuing resolution, and we hope that the budget does get signed. It's always in doubt. But in this case, I think it's imperative that the budget gets signed so they can execute all that money they're putting in the budget in 2026. It is definitely an administration priority. So I make note of this just to say that there is some chaos, or the budget process is chaotic because it is ultimately political. But from the perspective of national security, continuing resolutions are not a good thing. And we do our best to encourage the government not to get the bill signed and not operate under a steal. Now, another interesting thing is, as an action officer in the Pentagon, when somebody said, "Hey, we're working on the budget," I learned to ask which budget, right? And the process, the PPB&E, planning, programming, budgeting, and execution, or enactment process has 4 steps. The government, the Department of Defense does publish a long-range plan, a 5-year plan. It actually even publishes 10-year guidance. Real important if you're building fighter jets and ships, and you may have to recapitalize a shipyard or a factory. But the FIDUP, as it's called, the 5-year defense plan, is out there, and it's available online with the exception of some classified annexes. The planning process then goes to actually start writing the budget that will ultimately go to the White House and become part of the president's submission to Congress. And then hopefully it gets signed by Congress, and then it's executed. Working backward, today in 2025, the money being spent would be considered execution. It's the money we're spending today. If I was an action officer in the Pentagon today, it is July. I would be really busy writing and working on not the 26, but the 27 budget, because the 26 budget's already in front of Congress. And as an action officer, I would be working on the 27 budget and long-range planning on 28 and beyond. So at any moment in time, there are as many as 4 budgets being worked. So my point here is, when somebody says, "Hey, we have funding and it's in the budget," it's important to ask which budget. Are you spending it this year? Are you hoping to get it next year? Or is it something that is more conceptual or being programmed in a program that may not have been approved yet? So it's just a little bit of inside baseball here that, when somebody said, "We're going to do this and we have funds," you probably need to ask a few more questions to see how close they are to money, because it's not always obvious. Now, we shift away from the government and look into industry. Um, I know the market is large and efficient and mature and complex, but to me, this always offered a large set of opportunities. There are multiple ways to make contracts with the government. I'm certainly not going to read all these details to you on the left, but when you look at how contracts are made, and the government is compelled to compete everything. You can justify and do something as a directed award, and there's some tricks to the trade that I'll talk about in a moment. But in general, you have to go in with a competitive mindset. Um, there are ways as a small business to achieve some advantages. If you're a small business, you're doing business in what's called an economic hub zone. If you're Native American owned, these are all ways to at least reduce the competitive field and make it more likely that you'll win work. Um, it is important to understand the type of work you're doing. The government actually is somewhat definitive or determinate as to how much profit you get. In their mind, certain types of business or work, like you're doing R&D, and because you're taking risk, you should get more profit. Uh, and I would say that on reimbursable contracts, the government is comfortable with net profits in the low double digits, 10, 12%. That's net profit, not gross profit. Gross profits probably range in the in the 20 to 50% range, and depending on your cost structure, they somewhat regulate how much profit you can take out. At the very low end of the market, where you're doing administrative services or um, literally grounds maintenance and things like that, the profit margins could be very modest. They could be under 5%. Having said that, if you are able to sell to the government as a commercial item, you basically negotiate a commercial price, you substantiate that, and the margins are yours. It's a much more of a commercial transaction. So entering into government contracts with your eyes wide open is important, because ultimately it is going to dictate how much value you can extract from the contract. Now, the rest of the slide, exportability, compliance, the blue box. The point is, when you get that government contract, there's no doubt that there's a number of terms and conditions that you will need to sign up to. Certainly, as a U.S. company, you're always going to be subject to export control, ITAR. You will, as a U.S. company, regardless of what you sell, you can't sell to embargoed nations, et cetera. On the other hand, if you do business with the U.S. government, you're also going to have to comply with the federal acquisition regulations and something new called CMMC, which is the maturity model for cyber compliance, and it is in particular focused on non-classified data. The government kind of views industry as the soft underbelly in cyber, and you will be handling government data and, of course, your own data, which is being used for national security purposes. And that's one that's relatively new, new enough that right now companies are doing self-assessments, but probably in the next 2 years, they will have to start having external assessments done as to their cyber readiness. Once you're contracting and after you do a contract, depending on the size of the company, you could be subject to audits from a number of government agencies, either on the contract management, or security side. That's usually for medium and larger companies. I've seen smaller companies simply are given an assessment, and they're typically assessed as being low risk, and you don't go through a formal audit. Needless to say, a lot of terms and conditions in these contracts, and therefore it's good to go big, because this compliance does come at a cost to the company. There's no doubt. Now, all that being said, there's obviously a very large market opportunity. And what is it that makes a company successful when they attempt to sell to the government? And having been a government program manager, having sit on source selection boards for large contracts, I kind of look back at what was I thinking as a relatively inexperienced guy, with some, with a technical education, but I didn't know a lot about business and contracting. That is going to be your customer. And I found that I was more comfortable looking at companies that were offering me a solution rather than pieces of a solution. Because, and I think this is even more true today, that the government is not as well suited today to be a program manager, a program integrator, and they rely on industry to do that. So when you make an offer to the government, when you're responding to a proposal, when you're building a team, you almost have to imagine you're the customer and you're pretty much taking care of everything for them. Even very obvious things such as, well, you know what, if you're going to buy a 3D printer, somebody's got to configure it. Who's going to do that? Because it's not going to be the government. And you gotta think ahead, even if they don't ask explicitly. So when I read a solicitation, or if I am writing an unsolicited offer, I kind of think through the process from the perspective of what are the explicit requirements, but what are the implied requirements? And you don't want to miss those, because in many cases it may prevent the government from actually making a contract. You do want to determine that that customer not only has a need and you're able to offer a solution, you want to make sure they actually have money. And I know this sounds strange with $1 trillion in defense spending. It's difficult, to have a conversation sometimes, but to ask them very explicitly, we think this is going to be the scale of this type of program. There may be some options to configure it different ways technically or in time, but is the customer prepared to provide those resources? And if they are, what type of resources are they? Did they actually control them, or are they coming from a third party? The final thing is, it sounds funny, and I remind my own business developers that even if they have a need and they have the money and you have the perfect solution, they could, even if you you've invented a perpetual motion machine or the cure to cancer, the government can't buy it unless they have an appropriate contract vehicle. And we've seen that, we experienced that at the beginning of the Iraq and Afghanistan, well, the Iraq war, when the government really, really struggled up armoring Humvees. There was a very distinct need. There was a lot of public outcry. They had plenty of money and a lot of people had solutions, and they didn't have contract vehicles. They had contract vehicles to build vehicles, but not to modify vehicles. And it really took almost 2 years for the government to figure that out. Needless to say, there's a lot of options available: a direct contract with the government, teaming with somebody who has a contract. And Jacob's going to talk about a very important type of vehicle. It's on the bottom there, IDIQ, definite delivery and definite quantity. This is an omnibus vehicle that allows the government to match the need with the funds. What's important about IDIQs is that they're considered to be competitively awarded. So if you own an IDIQ, the government can direct an award to you without any further competition. They may not want to do that, but IDIQs are a special tool that you have in your tool bag if you have access to them. So an important tool to have. All right, and I'll finish off talking about what I've seen go wrong. And this is like baseball. If you hit 300, you go to the Hall of Fame. Well, government contracting is pretty similar. Just to give you some statistics, companies who have work are able to re-win that work, get follow-on work well over 90% of the time. So there is, even though no one would admit it, there is a certain amount of, I'll use the word loyalty, or there's certainly an advantage to be an incumbent. And actually, that statistic's about 93%. So if you have work and you do a good job and you maintain a relationship with the customer, there's a good chance you'll be around a while, as long as you find a way to stay relevant. On the other hand, if you're going to go try to win something completely new, and in fact take it away from another company, the success rate is between 25 and 35%. Let's say a third of the time. So again, you do that, you go to the Hall of Fame. But for large companies managing business development programs, the mix between incumbent work and new work, they try to win about 2/3 of what they bid on. And that way you can budget for and start to plan your business development resources and how much you want to win. A lot of benchmarks, a lot of statistics we can talk about, but there's no doubt that especially if you're doing a lot of business development, it is somewhat consistent that you can win about 1/3 of what you bid on. So you want to make $1 million, you got to bid on 3. Now, on the other hand, so the scale of your business development enterprise is absolutely important. If you want to win one, you're going to have to bid on more than one. On the other hand, some of the pitfalls are that this is a process, not an event. You got to be proactive. You got to think ahead for the government. You got to be answering questions sometimes that they didn't even think to answer. You got to be persistent and you got to be continuous. We know what the statistics are in commercial sales, the number of contacts, the number of yeses you get in the contact to contract chain. It's very similar in the government. So you need to be persistent. The second is the buyer in the government is not a person, but it's somewhat of an organization. And there's 3 constituencies. One is the end user, the person that's going to actually use your product and service. The second is the acquisition authority, that person's boss, or it could be several levels above them, that actually have the ability and the authority to spend money. And it's not the program manager. And then the third constituency are the acquisition officials, the people that actually care about the paperwork, the compliance, running the proposal process. In a sense, you got to have a relationship and make them all, make them all happy. But you don't want to just focus on the end customer and get them excited if they don't have the ability to spend money or the ability to make a contract. So I would say one of the pitfalls is that direct customer contact. With the exception of highly commoditized sales, like very generic IT business or administrative services, where you can just get something on the internet and reply on the internet and never talk to a customer, I think people get excited that they can go onto websites like GovCon or FedSim and get all this information and kind of reply in the blind. The hit rate on that is very low. Never miss the opportunity to talk to the customer. And having a long-term relationship, whether it's a business relationship or a technical relationship, or you're just doing some thought leadership, those relationships matter. This is all complex and expensive. So building a program, not to sell somebody something once, but to build a program where you can have a relationship with them over many years is important, because you just simply can't afford to do this every single time. And then some of the more typical ones that once you start taking R&D money, you can't wait till the end of the program to look for programs to start applying your technology. You want to work those in parallel. The government is particularly bad at helping people get out of the R&D world and into the procurement world. It's really going to be your job to do that. And the same with set aside contracts. If we love set aside contracts, but again, you get those, you can build your business, but you can't only do that. So at the end of the day, and I like this quote, if you go to the customer, especially with a new or emerging technology, and say, what do you need? There's a good chance they will have no idea. Or if they do, they'll just say, hey, I want what I get now, but I want it to be better, cheaper, or faster. You have an opportunity to offer them a completely different way to do business that will give them a quantum improvement in cost, efficiency, and performance. You're going to have to educate them and bring them capabilities that maybe they can't even imagine they can use today. So great time in defense. It will be probably for the next decade. The folks that are out there in the market and are ready, willing, and able to sell are really going to do well over the next decade. I think that's it.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really appreciate that, Gene. And I think there's a couple of aspects there that I mean, individual topics that you could spend an entire hour just kind of going through and discussing and really digging into. I know we've spent quite a bit of time on different types of contract vehicles and motivations of individual buyers and how that works. And so I appreciate at least the high level insight there. And certainly I think that's a piece. We did have one question, which was, can you define additive manufacturing? The way that additive manufacturing was defined, at least in those reports, in the public reports that are put together by the DoD's plan moving forward, it does break down the difference between, say, advanced manufacturing, which are new manufacturing techniques, and specifically additive manufacturing, which is manufacturing layer by layer to form a component, whether through laser powder bed or wire DED or whatever it is. But yeah, that is a distinction that they make specifically between advanced manufacturing, which may include things like certain types of new die casting techniques and lost wax methods, and also high-tech CNC and extrusion tools. Additive manufacturing is distinct from that, and that it's specifically the layer-wise.
Yeah, and actually, I'll tell you, when you go into those government documents and they talk about where they want to go with advanced manufacturing or additive manufacturing, they take a very broad view. And I'll tell you, one of the major components is workforce development. And the government, so when you make an offer to the government, explaining to the government that you have an internship program and telling them how you have relationships with academia, or you're hiring from local universities. These are all very good things, but the government does take a very broad view, which is good, because in this early stage, in your role as an educator for your customer, you can define it. And I do agree, additive is different than advanced. They consider a component of advanced, right?
Yeah, and to build on that, before we jump into Elizabeth's presentation here, there's aspects of, there's a line item that says it's $450 million for shipbuilding. That is not all going to, say, making parts.
Nope.
A fair amount of that is going to the administration of how do you administer these different contracts. A large portion of that is going to how do we integrate that with the current production techniques. A lot of that is going to paperwork and development of how do we make sure that we're tracking these things and directing these things in the right way. And so the actual portion of that is getting down to, say, a manufacturer is only a small fraction of that total.
And let me finish on that very point. For that budget, there is a vision to put an additive manufacturing capability on all capital ships, and we could talk about why that is, but that's their vision. They'll have to modify the ship in order to do that. That's in that budget. So a lot of that money is going to go for shipboard modifications that are really not specific to additive, but it's a good example of the way the government thinks. That's right.
All right. Well, I appreciate that, Gene. And certainly there'll be more time for additional questions at the end, and we'll be able to dig into a few more things, but I wanted to address that one right away. So with that, we'll move to Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth, we met 3 or 4 years ago now, I think maybe at one of the trade shows, and we got to discussing the relationship between industry, academia, government itself, and your experience in those sorts of areas, and that specifically you've worked in a lot of those different units, specifically within the government, and then also within entities that are meant to connect government and small business and large business and everything. So I'm really excited to have you present today a little bit more about maybe the insider view of how, so Gene presented the what is there, and I'm excited to hear from Elizabeth about the how. How do people go about doing this? What are some of the mechanisms in which you've seen be successful from a couple of different perspectives that you've had over the years? So really excited to have you presenting today as well.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. This is, it's so wonderful to hear everything that Gene's been talking about, because he's given this 30,000 foot view of really an entire system. And I just don't want anybody here to feel like they need to swallow all of that all at once. or figure it all out in their first year. But I do want to say that I want to pick up on one of his quotes. He was saying, Gene was saying, an educated client is going to be one of your best friends, one of your best advocates in this space. And I want to lean in on that. Let's talk a little bit about that. I want to talk about how if your client or the person you're talking to within the government as a small business, if they don't know the art of the possible, if they don't understand you and who you are and why you're talking to them, how the heck are they going to figure it out? So let's talk about different ways to educate them. Let's think through different ways to be your best advocate when you do make a break or have a great conversation or stumble upon just the right person at a trade show or a meeting of some sort. So we're thinking about how to be your best advocate for your company, your industry, your team, and knowing what kinds of expectations are there for you as you start to move into this space. So I have a couple of very different kinds of slides, but I'm going to do a little bit of talking. I'll follow up with some conversations at the end. I want to talk first about knowing who you are, knowing who you're talking to, and knowing why you're meeting. I won't go too much into this, but I do just want to say knowing, reminding people where you met them or how you are connected to them or how you know their office is an incredibly helpful thing to do. You know, just and update them on maybe the last time you spoke together. Know who you're talking to, do your research, go into all of those .gov websites and figure out, were there any major changes in this office or this team that you have previously spoken to or are speaking to for the first time? Ask, be curious, and consider, why you're meeting. Know about what you're talking about. Know about the priorities of the people. Do as much research as you humanly can before you step into a meeting, before you think about what suit you're going to wear, before you figure out how you're going to get to a place. I will say when you're talking about how does government work with industry, I think one of I'm going to shift from knowing who you are, who you're going to talk to emerging and advanced technology. So we're talking specifically from an additive perspective, but we're also talking from an advanced manufacturing, emerging technologies, deep tech. There are a bunch of newfangled terms out there as well for this community. We're talking about scaling. So we're talking about emerging tech. Think of the Gartner hype cycle that's coming through and isn't in the hype cycle, but is really in that sort of slow scale up right after the curve. So we're going to be talking about dual use technologies as well, what that is, what that means, and why DoD seems to care about dual use technology, especially with this administration, but really with any kind of administration shift. And increasingly, we're going to see it. When we say dual use, what does that mean? Usually it means you're taking something from a research perspective, and you're saying this actually has a whole bunch of applications, not just for military US government use, but also weapons use, but also for things like manufacturing, things for industries, things for consumer electronics, things for, I don't know, the automotive industry, possibly even the increasingly commercialized space industry. There are some incredible opportunities to really say, hey, this is how we are supporting industry, and this is how we want to support government. Those are two very different and distinct things. You can say it's all the same, but government knows it's dual use. Government knows it's dual use because when you sell to industry and you sell to government, those processes are not the same. Gene had some incredibly detailed slides about all the different contractual arrangements and rules and laws you have to pay attention to when you're in this space. There is a cost to doing business with government. And when you want to take on that cost, when you want to scale with government, that is something that really is understood and is really known by all the people you're talking to in government. So they want to know about you. They want to know how you're prepared to meet those costs, to meet those expectations. They want to make sure that you actually have the organization ready to meet their needs if they do choose you as a performer, if they do want to award you an SBIR or STTR, they want to give you your first contract. And then you want to start thinking about what next. So I want to drop a term that I first heard when I first joined the OSD Mantech team a while ago, and it's that economic security is national security. When you're thinking about dual use technology and as an emerging technology or advanced manufacturing or advanced technology startup, you're going to scale with the DoD. They want to make sure that your awareness of of the economics of your business, the jobs you create, those are all part of the economic security and the national security. That's one of the reasons why they're putting a lot of requirements on this industry right now. Jean was talking a lot about the CMMC framework on the cybersecurity protection. That is one of the most vulnerable aspects of our manufacturing space. Everyone knows that, and it is what happens when you shift from a very manual series of technologies to systems that are connected, that aren't air gapped, that are completely that are getting information from the cloud at all points in time, and we need to keep that thought process in the back of our head, the fact that economic and national security really are linked, especially in this moment in time when we have a real shift in priorities, when we actually have an industrial strategy. This is really the first time, in my lifetime we have had something like this. So this is a really interesting moment. So I want to shift a little bit to some resources that currently exist completely free to use or extremely low cost to use that exist across this community, just to kind of make sure you're aware of these resources to leverage when you are kind of bringing a lot of your ideas into a meeting. You want to make sure that you have first talked to the SBDCs. Those are the Small Business Development. Gosh, I don't remember what the C stands for. They help you with anything having to do with loans, figuring out all the different SAM.gov registrations, all of that information. That's all run by the SBA, the Small Business Administration. So make sure you check with your SBDCs. Make sure you also check with your PTACs. That's a previous name. Now they're called Apex Accelerators. And this is a free resource that's offered by the DoD Office of the Small Business. And they actually have incredible, mostly free or incredibly low cost seminars, webinars, and information sessions, both the regional, state, and national level. Every region has them. In addition to SBDCs, they're in every region. The PTACs, or the Apex Accelerators, are incredibly helpful in this moment for anyone inside government to communicate with small businesses, small, medium-sized, growing businesses such as your own, and just like Elementum. Another manufacturing-specific resource that's available to everybody is the MEP network, and that's a manufacturing extension partnership, and that is actually run by the Commerce Department, but they have been around for 30-some years, and they are incredibly helpful when it comes to quality programs, whether you're talking about NADCAP or ISO certification. They also are very specific to each region, so if you're in a region that does a lot of forestry, they have a lot of resources that are specific to that. If you're in a region like I am in the Pittsburgh area, where we have a lot of specialty metals, they have an incredible specialty in our local MEP for those kinds of resources. And I wanted to mention these because most of this is free information that you can start, linking to all of these webinars, paying attention to it. Now, let's get back to why are you talking to somebody at DoD and what are you trying to do there? What you want to do is you want to show up. You want to be helpful. You want to represent your company incredibly well. You want to be thoughtful. You want to have already thought through all the complexity of why you're talking through all of this. You want to have worked with a few consultants to figure out what your narrative is and why you're doing what you're doing, why your approach is the way it is, because you need to be aware, empathetic, understanding, flexible. You want to show up with solutions in hand. You don't just want to say, here's cool stuff, what do you want to do with it? The more you put in to thinking about your client and thinking about your client's needs, and I'm not talking general DoD, I'm talking about who is the person or team you're about to meet, why are they taking time to meet with you, and what can you do to help them? Think of this not as a sales pitch. This is not an opportunity to sell. This isn't a pitch to investors. What this is the beginning of a relationship. And you're really trying to say, you can trust me, this is why you can trust me, and here are all the people that are ready to vouch for me. When you get into these conversations and you really take down your guard and you really demonstrate that you are knowledgeable and flexible and know enough about the kind of person you're talking to be able to really own that conversation, they may start to see that they can really talk with you and be open. And then we can talk about keeping the conversation going. I'm going to go through a couple of the pictures that I have here just to show a bit of an illustration of this. So this first picture is actually from a few weeks ago at the Pentagon. There was one of the offices that I support happened to have Mr. Emil Michael. He is the new, Heidi Shue had his role before him in the last administration. He is the new Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering Undersecretary. So here he is talking to one of the programs in his office. And here is the situation in which, oh, here we go. He's talking to people. This is a very interactive show and tell. I mean, these folks have actually brought things to, you know, I call them touchy-feelies. They've actually brought prototypes, things you can pick up, talk about, demonstrate, explain. These sorts of things are incredibly helpful. And you can see Mr. Houthi and Mr. DeVries right behind him, and Dean Kamen, who's with the BioFab Institute, I think. But I'm just going to go back to this one and say, this is your opportunity space. This may look like, oh, just another conference, but this is really where you go and you find those conversations. You collect those cards, but what you're really trying to do is understand a need. And what you do when you wander through a space like this, and this could be a conference, this could be an industry day, this doesn't need to be what this particular picture is, which is one of the apexes, the apexes of the Pentagon. It can be a workshop, it could be a meeting, it could be a technology interchange meeting, it could be an industry day that you found out about on LinkedIn, it could be a conference that you've signed up for that you sent a couple of your teams to. But you want to be prepared to make really good initial contact here, but know that that is not your one opportunity. This is your opportunity to get a little bit of information and then figure out how to get that next meeting. And it's all about keeping that conversation going. Jean did mention that this is the kind of work that you don't just get done. It's not one thing. It's not a short-term opportunity. These are marathons. If you're getting to work with the government and you're moving around office to office, individual to individual, conference to conference, this is really marathon pace. So you want to make sure that you've got the right team. You've got to make sure you've got the right language to represent yourself and your organization. You want to make sure that you have enough information about where the budget is, what the time of year is, what your needs are, what your expectations are, and who you're going to meet and who you're going to talk to is also going to influence that. One of the things you could do, and here are just a couple of bigger ideas. You're not necessarily just thinking on behalf of yourself or your industry. You want to think about who some of your best clients, supply chain partners, or suppliers are really. You can go as a team or an affinity network and say, hey, we've got a solution. Hey, we've got an idea. Hey, we want to talk about something to government folks. Government folks on the inside often have their hands tied a lot more than industry folks do. So as Jean said, please be as open as you can, as helpful as you can, with as much information as you can bring to the conversation, because that's really where the conversations open up. Think of anything in R&D, any kind of government partner in R&D really as a partner. They all have signed incredibly, because anytime you talk to somebody in government, know that you don't need to ask them to sign an extra NDA. A government person is already bound and absolutely will not share any of your information. That's just something that's incredibly important to know. I want to take a step back and say, so we're talking about keeping that conversation going. We're talking about all the different places you can go. When you find a partner or find a conversation, one of the first questions you're going to want to ask is, where do they sit at DoD? Within which office? You want to figure out if they're a technical person, an acquisition person, somebody in leadership, and you're going to need to tailor your conversation and your messaging to them at that point in time. And when you do bring some of these thoughtful ideas to the conversation, be ready for the right kind of feedback. Be ready for somebody to completely slaughter your idea, and be prepared to go back to the drawing board about it. You don't ever take it as a personal thing. Sometimes it has to do with internal politics. Sometimes it has to do with the way the budgets came out. If you miss an opportunity and you have a strong relationship with that team, continue to engage them, continue to show up, continue to build the right kind of coalitions that you think you will need, and they might also need to continue to move forward in this space. So I kind of just want to wrap all this stuff up by saying, at the end of the day, when we're talking about emerging technologies scaling into something that's either manufacturing or just a larger impact on the DoD, at the end of the day, the mission is to support the warfighter. And when we support the warfighter, what we mean, and that term hit me pretty strongly when I first came into the government, but when we say the warfighter, we're really talking about the people behind. So think about how your technology impacts people. Think about the mission. Think about the reason why people go to work for government, and think about the fact that this economic security is national security, really is that bridge, that partnership, that longer term reason why we need to have these much more open, candid, and long-term and deep conversations with our partners in government, whether it's Department of Defense, Energy, Commerce, you name it. We're all trying to solve a lot of very difficult problems, challenges, changes in technology in this fairly unique point in time. Right now, it's not just a shift from one administration to another. We're really in a very unique moment. And so right now, a lot of things are shifting, things are changing, and we really need to be looking for the pathways, as Jacob said at the very beginning, the pathways and the programs to really connect the dots and really solidify that foundation on which we can continue to build more and more successful programs really together. And that, I think, is where I'm going to end my piece. I'll end with a fairly familiar Gibson quote and say, the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed yet. Much of our role on the industry side is to help educate our government clients and, candidly, also our representatives in this democratic republic. And so it's on us, if we know a little bit more about this technology, to really show up and come up with the best analogies, metaphors, clarifications, ways to explain this to an educated and thoughtful, but not anywhere near as technical as we are, audience. So I'll stop right there and say thank you for the opportunity to follow someone like Jean. And Jacob, I want to hear about what Elementum has been doing in this space as a small business with the government.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Thank you, Elizabeth. And I think there's a lot of aspects to the discussion around how to find the right people to be representing your company. And it's not just, do they have the most technical knowledge? And it's not just, are they really good at selling? There's an interesting combination of, they have to know your products, they have to know how and where to apply it, and they have to be good at determining who is really going after these sorts of products and why they would want them and who doesn't want them, because you can spend just as much time there. But we found, and I'll get into this a little bit, but last year we spent $800,000 just going after how do we acquire new business within the DoD, from hiring outside experts to our own internal people chasing business, with no expectation of any of those dollars turning into revenue for 2 years. And so there's a lot that goes into how do you go after and develop and start doing business with the U.S. government. And I think that's really where we are. So I really appreciate that. Thank you, Elizabeth. So really quickly, just to give a little bit of background on who I am, I'm Jacob Nectarline. I have a PhD in material science with a focus on metal powders. Interestingly, I did my PhD focused on developing new armors and how to up armor Humvees, even though I didn't realize that was a large, effort at the time. It was something that they were looking for every different way in which they could do that. And so I've since been working in the industry space around how do we develop new technologies and new capabilities for defense contracting. I'm going to be relatively brief today because I think most of you know who Elementum is and what we do, but I did want to highlight a couple of things in that, specifically we've been successful, and it started, with our business going after SBIR and being successful at SBIR, which is a particular type of contract that has a vehicle and dollars associated with it, which is not necessarily how all contracts really go. But they're also pretty limited in that they tend to be stuck in that R&D cycle that Gene mentioned. And so we started to use those as non-dilutive funding rather than as, say, true government contracting. The advantage that the SBIR and STTR programs gave us back in 2019 and 2020 really gave us a history of success with being able to deliver on government contracts, and gave us a baseline on things like DFARS and cybersecurity and ITAR and EAR and those sorts of things. But it didn't really become more complex and also have opportunities at larger government contracts until we started going after OTAs and specifically going out and hitting the ground and talking with individuals within the DoD, NASA, NSA, but also NIST, and really going after those sorts of conversations that are important to have around why someone would choose to use your products. And so I think that's been an exciting journey for us. Really quickly, I mean, we've been able to secure a number of different contracts over the years, but more recently we've been getting into full qualification programs and concepts there, where it's really about that transition from the R&D stage into full-blown, I would say, actual, Air Force, actual Army. And we found that there is this massive valley between, say, the research groups like AFRL or Army Futures and Army proper. And I understand that the DoD is trying to bridge those gaps and find different ways. I think the most effective way that we have found in the past of overcoming that gap has been to go through the large companies. So through Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, those sorts of companies. And I think that's all good, and that's still a pathway that exists. But I think there's been a bigger push more recently to have more direct work with small businesses to directly go after larger and more complex contracts to really be able to deliver the most up-to-date and most innovative pieces. And you don't have to kind of put it through the gates of those who are already making the current products, because their motivation is not to change what they're doing unless it makes them more money or gets them further ahead or helps them build bigger barriers behind them, from the other large primes. And so that's one of the things that we focused on is not only how do we work with the large primes, but how do we start to work more directly with the DoD proper. And one of the ways that we're really going after tackling this, and in ways that gives us more ways to work with the large primes, and then also ways to work directly, has been through this IDIQ. And so I wanted to briefly touch on this before we take some final questions and wrap up here. But an IDIQ is a contract vehicle that does not have dollars behind it. So even though it states that it's a $46 billion contract, that's generally something that people hear. $46 billion, how did a company like Elementum get a 46? Well, it's not. It doesn't have those dollars in it. It has the capacity to take up to that amount. And that's really where there's the value in that. It makes it easier for us to contract if there are dollars and we go out and find dollars. And so it makes it easier for us to be a prime direct with the US DoD to really go after certain applications. In this case, the EWAC IDIQ that we were awarded allows us to go after contracts that are specifically focused on in this case, armaments. And so this is focused on armaments, and while it's through the Air Force, it's actually an enterprise-wide. So it could be armaments for the Army, even though it's an Air Force contract. And so it's one of these things that if we have an Army customer that wants to go after say a missile program, we can contract through this, which has already been negotiated. It already has a contract in place. It doesn't need to be competed because we've already competed to get into this IDIQ. And so it took us several years to get to the point where we have this sort of vehicle. And I expect that it'll still take another couple of years to actually put dollars into this program. But now that we have that, we could be under contract within weeks instead of being under contract in months or even years, which is really, I think, the value of this and the value of being able to go after programs like IDIQs and others is that it makes the contracting process easier. And let's be honest, when we're working with individuals out of the DoD, as Gene put it, they want an entire solution. Well, they not only want the entire solution technically, they also want the entire solution to be delivered as to how they would even contract. So even if they have dollars, they may not be able to spend it with you, or if it takes them 6 months of work, would they rather do that, or would they rather apply dollars to a contract that's already in place that they could just expand? And so it's really about how do you do business and make their lives easier and deliver something that they can then stand on and say, hey, I was able to deliver this for the DoD by working with these great companies like Elementum. You want them to say that last part, by working with great companies. And that's the piece that you have to be able to deliver on and build relationships with. And so just tying together what Gene was saying and what Elizabeth was saying is that there's the technical aspects of how and what, and putting those together in the kind of context of we're still people, all having a relationship, buying from each other, even though it's government and it's kind of this faceless thing. There are individuals that have to make the decision as to move forward, and oftentimes they're so busy they can't make a decision on every little thing. They want you to deliver something for them that's straightforward and easy for them to tackle, and that means you have to spend a lot early on to be able to get things that come in later. So with that, I'd like to move to questions and jump in to conversation. If anyone wants to go after this, as I mentioned, we recorded this, and we'll share the recording of that, so you can share that with anyone internally as to what that looks like. But I'm going to turn it over to Patrick, who will be able to jump in and maybe present some of the questions that we've had submitted.
Thanks, Jacob. I really appreciate it. And thanks to the other presenters. Awesome work. Let's move into the Q&A. We've got a few questions. I know we're running a little late, so hopefully you can hang on, and this should be quite interesting. The first question we have coming in was, what is the best way to engage DARPA? Who would like to take that?
So I think Elizabeth will jump in here, but one of the ways that we've found to engage with DARPA is a lot of them are individuals who are from academia or from other companies who are taking a stint at DARPA. And so it's a short period of time that they're there. And so developing those relationships, and then also making sure that you develop relationships with others as they're incoming. It's best to do work with them as they're just getting into their role, because generally once they're in, they want to start a program at the beginning and then they want to see it through. So it's working with an individual who's just gotten into DARPA and started their time there. I don't know, Elizabeth, if you want to add some context there.
Yeah, I agree strongly, because it's true. A lot of people go in for a very short detail or something and they can't stick around for a long time. The only other thing I was going to mention is go to all of these organizations' websites. They will often have a connect with us here, and you can sign up for newsletters, get yourself on a newsletter list, because that's where they send invitations to public events, outreach activities, and industry days. The term industry day is something you want to make sure you're searching your LinkedIn for and scanning it every single day, because there are an incredible number of things that actually are more easily found on LinkedIn than you can find them almost anywhere else, unless you're going directly to the website, the .gov website, where they say, connect here, or we're going to be showing at, or we're going to be at a different conference. If you don't see anything, give them a call. Or even if you're looking at a contract and you're trying to figure out what's going on, there's always a contact person, and ask where that office is going to be exhibiting. Because every office has a bit of an outreach arm, and they're going to say, these are the 3 conferences we, without fail, will be at every year. And that's where you want to make sure you're showing up with your best, research and your best frame of mind, ready for a conversation.
Great. Next question.
Yeah, next question. Here we go. What are some of the events in the defense markets that are worth attending for a small technology provider?
I've gone to AUSA in some of the larger conferences, and while those can be valuable if you already have connections and you know who to talk to, and you could go there, the right people will be there. at conferences like AUSA or NAVSE. Those conferences are huge, and they're hard to do like initial reach out or business development, because it's hard to tell who to talk to and who. It's at least for a company like me. So I found that more effectively is developing the first steps of the relationship are maybe more industry specific conferences that is focus on DoD. So like within additive manufacturing, I've been going to Mill AM, which is I think in January. And then there's a couple of other things like America Makes conferences, those sorts of things where there's DoD presence.
Yeah.
I would add, Elizabeth said a minute ago, we're talking about industry days. Industry days are important. They're not conferences, but they're a conference of a sort, but they're there for the government to tell you specifically what their needs are and how they're going to put it on contract. But what goes on in the audience is all your industry colleagues are there, and there's a lot of team building that goes on in that room when people see what the requirements are. If I could only go to one thing, I would go to an industry day.
Yeah, that's a great point, Gene. And when you show up in person, it's very different than a virtual event, because you can do that teaming. You can look around the room and say, oh, there are 3 people that I already know here, and I know we can work well together, or I know that together we might be able to come up with something that's a lot more interesting than just showing up as one company.
Right.
There's a follow-up on DoD travel. So specifically, the travel restrictions have been based around, not being able to go travel to new opportunities or new things that they haven't been doing before. Oftentimes, they still have the ability to travel to, say, active contractees. So if you are already under contract, then oftentimes they can figure out reasons to travel to that area under current contractees. We've actually had a couple of DoD folks travel out to see us under that auspice, where they're visiting someone else in the area who they're already under contract with, and they'd like to be under contract with us moving forward. But then a lot of it is just going to travel to them. They have no restrictions on seeing people, but it means they have a lot more time to accept people at their place of business, because they're not traveling all over at the moment. So there's maybe better opportunities to do things like that. As far as how it's impacting attendance at events, I definitely saw a difference at AMUG this year, where there were much fewer individuals from the government who are attending that in there in person, but it wasn't zero either. Yeah.
Go to them. Right now is a great time to go to them.
Yep.
I think we'll try to squeeze 2 more in. I know we're way over, but here we go. What is driving the defense establishment's interest in adopting additive manufacturing?
Yeah, Gene, maybe you're best to. I have ideas.
Yeah, it depends on, it depends on the community, right? If you think about the challenges in the undersea warfare community, the coin of the realm is the ability to deploy a submarine for as long as possible, and the ability, to do manufacturing and repair on board while you're on deployment, meaning undersea, is a combat multiplier. I would say the same thing for ships on station. So what is driving, the Navy's adoption, tends to be, I'll call it that logistics and sustainment capability. I think, the Army and the Marine Corps have the same thoughts. The Air Force, on the other side, in my discussions, they are, I don't know what the right word is, enamored, fascinated with the aspects of material science that will support advanced applications like hypersonics, the ability to produce solid missile or rocket cores at scale and quickly. It tends to be more the technical attributes. So, but again, I think you look back in this 10 years from now, because the enormity of the requirement, the logistics advantage forward deployed additive manufacturing is going to provide is going to dominate.
Okay. And then the second one kind of builds on it. Who are the leaders in the defense establishments that, or even the decision makers in the adoption of additive manufacturing within
That is
the DoD?
That is a wildly complicated question that I wish I could answer in a few minutes here. But really, at the end of the day, it's a combination of a lot of things. And the enormity of the complexity of the system is so great that I think it's pretty hard to say that. Anytime you're seeing a product or a process move from emerging technology in the R&D space, and you're starting to connect it with a system, I think that's when the decision makers become a little bit more clear. And that is separate from any single contract that might be part of that. This is why we call this space in between R&E and commercialization and the commercial pickup of technology, the pull and the push. This is why we talk about that space as the valley of death. That's why we have these incredibly dramatic metaphors that really highlight how difficult it is not just to carry a business through that space, but also to fund it. And to really say, this is really why people seek out a lot of venture capital money, or they try to build up their coffers before they make that jump, that leap, because this is really the really difficult space in trying to translate, transfer, or really scale. So I'd say, the deeper you get into that space, the more you know about it, the better off you're going to be. But every single person's question is going to be, or answer is going to be different, and it depends on the day. It could change.
To try to put a finger on where we found some movement and particular adoption, certainly I would say that the research labs, AFRL, Army Futures, those kind of groups, certainly those guys. But if we're actually talking about wanting to cross that valley of death into the other side, we found the most interest and the most movement has actually come from sustainment, and sustainment activities and opportunities with aircraft, with vehicles, and with ships that are aging and that have been around for 50, 60 years. They're looking for fast, accurate replacements with performance out of those replacements as good or better that can last another 50 years. I mean, we're talking about aircraft and airframes that were built in the 70s that they're hoping will outlast maybe even me. And so I think that's an interesting aspect, is that the US DoD is really heavily looking at how do we make our investments last even longer. And that's one of the areas that it can transition over to at least first use in sustainment and repair. So that's where we found some traction, at least specifically.
Yeah.
And so when we say the who, maybe not an individual, although there are individuals associated, but the who's being the sustainment offices within the DoD.
All right. If there's nothing else, Jacob might want to wrap it up, but go ahead, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if Jean wanted to say anything since I've been talking a lot.
Jump in on that one.
What's that?
Yeah.
Well, I had an interesting conversation, and I found myself sitting next to a White House official about a week ago, and I asked that question. I said, who cares about this? And he kind of looked at me and he said, I don't know anything about manufacturing. I don't know, but he said, but let me tell you, if you have something important to say, he said, this administration's unique in that, good or bad, they listen to everybody. If you have an idea or a pitch, they're going to listen. And there's probably no better time in government, and you can't do this as a company, you got to do it as an industry. But going to the administration saying this is national importance, it has significant national security and economic security impacts, and this is something the U.S., this is a big one, can be the absolute number A1 leader. We can own this, kind of like AI. And you're going to find champions in the Army, the Navy, AFRL. You need those champions to get contracting done. But this would be kind of a thought leadership objective of industry to get together we could get access, into those offices to say, we'd like to give you a one-page paper and give you a 5 or 10 minute brief on why you, the administration or the Pentagon, need to have an additive manufacturing czar. And here's where you want to come out of this in 5 years. We got to cross over from something Elizabeth said, instead of being additive curious, this needs to be a fundamental way and a baseline way of doing business in the United States, and jump over the line. And I think this is something that could be done in Washington over the next 2 years.
Well, I really want to thank everyone who attended, and again, thank you to Elizabeth and Jean. Of course, if you want to reach out specifically to any of us individually, happy to direct you to one of them. I know they've both been very helpful for me for understanding better how to work with the U.S. Department of Defense, and so I appreciate their time and yours. So thanks, everybody.
Well done. Yep.
Thank you, Jacob. Thanks, Jean.